Channel. The National Crime Agency says some of its investigations are ready to go to court, while others are just beginning. Well, that news comes amid record-breaking cross-channel numbers. We can get more from Piers Hopkirk, who's with me now. We have just come through a busy summer, Piers. Are those numbers expected to continue?
Well, the National Crime Agency said today they believe they are having an impact on bringing numbers down. But that said, the trend, the trajectory, looks like we are in for another record-breaking year. So last year, 28,500 people making the crossing in small boats. This year, we're already over 25,000. Of course, there's still 3 months of the year left, and we've already broken a record this week, and that was for the number of migrant crossings in a single day. 1,295 in 27 boats. Last month we were reporting on how people smugglers were using the social media platform TikTok to effectively to drum up business. Well, this morning Matt Rivers from the National Crime Agency told the Today programme what they were doing to try and clamp down.
We're working with social media companies to shut down those pages. It's a really broad picture. But I think if you look at how the numbers were increasing dramatically at the tail end of last year, I think actually if those numbers were to continue, then we would be seeing far more migrants arriving in the UK. I think the good work that we've done has had an impact.
And Piers, more controversy today about the government's plan to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda.
Yes, this comes from the charity Medical Justice. Now, they send in clinicians into detention centres to treat people there. Now, they've urged the government to abandon the plan. They say simply the threat of deporting people to Rwanda has caused significant mental health issues for those people. Here's what they said.
A lot of the people who have been selected by the government for removal to Rwanda are people who have fled torture and trafficking, who have had very significant trauma, who have severe mental illness, some who have physical health problems. So potentially these are highly vulnerable people. And out of the 36 people who we have looked at least 26 had medical evidence of a history of torture.
Now, because of an ongoing legal challenge, of course, there has been no deportation flights yet to Rwanda. But this is what the Home Office said to us today. They said no one will be relocated if it's unsafe or inappropriate for them. And our thorough assessment of Rwanda has found that it's a fundamentally safe and secure country with a track record of supporting asylum seekers.
Piers, thank you. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Peter Walsh from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, a non-political organisation. I asked him first why there's been such a dramatic increase in people crossing the Channel in small boats this year.
Well, there are really two sets of factors. One is geopolitical. When we look at the conditions in the countries of origin, the countries these people are coming from, these are some of the most chaotic parts in the world. And it's no surprise that we've seen this year a big increase in the number of Afghans crossing the Channel. Following the rise of the Taliban last year. So geopolitics is important, but there's also been another factor, which is somewhat perversely, as the Home Office and French authorities have increased enforcement at the freight terminals in Calais, that's made it very difficult to travel by previously established routes, road and rail, and that's compelled these individuals to seek this other third route.
And why the UK? Because one question that many people have, people facing persecution settle in another European country without having to make that dangerous crossing in the world's busiest shipping lane.
It's a great question, and also it's been observed that the conditions they would face in other countries are more generous for asylum seekers than the conditions that would face them on arrival in the UK. But when we speak to these individuals, they talk about the perception that the UK is a safe, tolerant and democratic country. They talk about a preference to speak or learn English once they're in a country, and it doesn't change that. These individuals, once they talk about a preference to speak or learn English.
We now know that in August, more than 8,500 people arrived in the UK through the boat crossings organised by smuggling gangs. That took the total so far this year to more than 25,000. We look set to soon surpass the total for the whole of 2021 and could go far beyond last year's 28,500. Here's the account of one woman who lives on the Kent coast in Dungeness about seeing people who aren't brought ashore by Border Force or others.
It's potentially dangerous for these people to land here. From the point of view of the people who live here, it is, because we don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. It's actually quite daunting when you're on the beach and you see them marching up there in great numbers, most of whom are wearing designer clothes. There doesn't seem to be any sign of poverty, any sign of humility that you would expect from refugees. One of the dinghies that comes in without an escort might have just landed. They could be anywhere in the landscape. They've been seen at night because you can see the torches as they run across the shingle. And I've seen scouts on the beach as well, looking out to sea, looking at their phone, looking out to sea again, obviously waiting for someone to come in, with pre-arranged transport waiting to pick them up. This is what people don't understand. It's not all about Border Force and RNLI. It really isn't. There's a lot of it happening under the radar.
Well, the trafficking of people, guns or drugs all falls within the remit of the National Crime Agency. In July, they were part of a successful international operation against smuggling gangs. That was coordinated by Branch Commander Matt Rivers. He spoke to us from the NCA offices in Dover alongside Deputy Director of Threat Leadership, Andrea Wilson.
The numbers are extraordinary, and that is a challenge for all of us involved in the tackling of organised immigration crime, specifically the small boats area.
But as you look at this, do you believe you can turn the tide on it and ultimately bring these crossings to an end? Is it within your capability?
So working with our partners, as I've described, both here and overseas, we are absolutely having an impact. Whether we will ever stop the crossings, if I had the answer to that, that would be wonderful. But we are all certainly collectively having a very good go at it and a very good impact. And I know that you're going to hear from Matt very shortly about some of the recent success and the impact that we've had.
Yes, Matt, you led the big operation in July, which had 40 arrests, but we've had thousands of arrivals since then, haven't we?
We have had a number of arrivals, but the arrests are those really behind the migrant transfers. We haven't arrested every group as yet. We're working on as many groups as we can identify and where the intelligence leads us. But we do believe that we did have an impact on the large operation in the summer, and we will have further impact as we continue.
But of those 40 arrests, how many prosecutions do you envisage from that operation?
I would anticipate the very large majority of the 40 arrests will be prosecuted.
And that would add to how many prosecutions that are already ongoing for this type of people smuggling?
Well, the NCA is engaged in approximately 60 investigations at this time. Some are ready for taking to court, some are just started.
Okay, and actual active prosecutions?
I don't have that number to hand, I'm
Andrea?
afraid.
As Matt said, we've got over 60 active investigations. That is a living number, so to try and give you an exact number today, we can't do that, unfortunately.
But it sounds as if it's not very many. I mean, the reason I ask about the numbers is because of the scale of what's happening across the channel, but also there's an extra legal tool in the armoury, if you like, which is that under the recent changes to immigration law, people, not the smugglers, but the actual arrivals, can be prosecuted if you knowingly arrive in the UK without valid entry clearance. Do you anticipate prosecuting anyone who arrives on a small boat under that legislation?
If you look at the numbers, what have we had? Over 25,000 arrivals so far this year. You cannot physically arrest every single person. This is very much targeted, making sure that the intelligence is right and that we achieve the most successful impact that we can.
The big increase in the numbers lately has been arrivals from Albania. Could some of them be involved in violent and serious organised crime groups themselves? That is what has been reported as being the understanding of officials.
There has been an increase in Albanians, that has been well reported. Whether or not they're engaged in organised criminality when they arrive here, that's part of the assessment process.
How closely are you working with the Albanian authorities now?
Yeah, the Albanian authorities are engaged, and we are closely working through Europol with all our partners.
What does that mean on the ground? You're talking to us from your offices in Dover. Are there Albanian police, law enforcement working with you now, looking at the arrivals, who advertised to them, how they got here?
Yes, we're working again with all our partners across Europe. We're working with social media companies to shut down those pages. It's a really broad picture.
It's the fact that it's growing, isn't it? That the crossings are growing, that is what has made this even more alarming. Would more resources help?
Yes, it on the face of it, it's growing in terms of numbers up from last year. But I think if you look at how the numbers were increasing dramatically at the tail end of last year, I think actually if those numbers were to continue, then we would be seeing far more migrants arriving in the UK. I think the good work that we've done has had an impact.
Wasn't that partly because of the weather earlier this year? I mean, I know it carried on into the autumn this year and we had that terrible loss of life. Then the winter came, but this summer, it's just been day after day through August of really high numbers.
Well, the weather does have an impact, there's no two ways about it, but I think our work has also had an impact. We can't say what the numbers would have been if we weren't conducting the operations, but we have taken out serious criminals and we are continuing to target them.
What would help your work, Matt?
I think we're doing pretty well. I hesitate to say resources, probably never have enough resources to do all the law enforcement work that we would like to do across UK law enforcement. So, I don't know. We've got the tools in the box in the NCA to target serious organised criminals behind this, and we're using all those tools.
Matt Rivers and Andrea Wilson of the NCA, thank you both.